Solomon's net worth was over $2 trillion, yet his true treasure was not gold, it was the mind that governed his wealth. In the courts of ancient Israel, where every choice carried spiritual weight, the greatest shift was simple and profound, from scarcity fear to abundance wisdom. This is the ancient psychology behind capital, 7 capital laws shaped by wisdom, stored within the soul's internal treasury, ready to be awakened in anyone who dares to govern desire with intention. The first law is intention. Wealth is not merely acquired, it is declared inwardly before it is ever visible outwardly. The second is disciplined stewardship. What you measure, you strengthen, what you neglect, you lose. The third is right counsel. Decisions made alone are vulnerable, wisdom grows through guidance, through careful counsel, through lessons that outlast emotion. The fourth is value of purpose. Capital follows meaning, and meaning follows the inner standard you refuse to betray. The fifth law turns fear into motion. When scarcity whispers, the answer is faithful action, not frantic hoarding. The sixth law is righteous exchange. Wealth expands where trust is honored and benefit returns to the giver. The seventh law is lasting vision. You do not pursue money for its own shadow, you pursue a future you can stand behind, year after year. Stay with these 7 laws, and you will see how abundance begins within, how internal treasury becomes a disciplined inner climate, and how Solomon's wisdom can translate into decisions that grow wealth quietly, steadily, and with power that endures. The legend of Solomon's wealth. The struggling merchant Elias meets the king's wisdom. Solomon's wealth is often spoken of in measures that would stagger a modern court, with legends placing his net worth beyond $2 trillion. In the palace air, gilded lamps did not merely burn, they seemed to signal a deeper order, as if wisdom itself had made a home in the heart of the city. Elias, a merchant with dust on his hems and worry in his eyes, entered with a ledger that felt heavier than his cargo. He had traded for survival, counting each coin twice, as though shortage were a law of nature. The first turning came when Solomon received him without hurry. A mind that expects loss spends itself before the transaction begins, the king said, his voice calm as a stone laid on water. Elias confessed that he delayed purchases to avoid risk, refused fair profit to remain safe, and watched opportunities pass as if they were thieves. Solomon's gaze rested on Elias's hands, then on his chest, as though he sought the true source of the fear. The king called this the internal treasury, the hidden storehouse of certainty, discipline, and intention that governs every outward exchange. Then he named the capital laws that bound wealth not only to goods, but to perception. Law 1 was the law of prepared expectation. Solomon instructed Elias to set terms in his mind before he set them in contracts, define the outcome, choose a path, and refuse to bargain with dread. Elias practiced by rewriting his plans with clear assumptions, what he would buy, why it served his customers, and how he would measure success beyond mere survival. His second step was less visible. He began speaking to himself with steadiness, so his decisions would not change whenever the market's wind shifted. In cinematic stillness, the merchant looked less like a man begging for luck and more like a steward of a future. Law 2 was the law of value before volume. Do not chase more, Solomon said, chase what is true value to the people you serve. Elias had been buying the cheapest goods to stretch his coins, only to lose time and trust when quality faltered. Solomon guided him to ask sharper questions: which items are consistently useful? Which supply routes protect reliability? Which reputation keeps buyers returning? Within his stall, Elias changed his ordering, reduced waste, and turned his attention from frantic sales to steady trust, as if abundance were a garden that grows by seasons, not by panic. The king's third was the law of ethical leverage. The word ethical sounded gentle, yet it carried a blade sharp enough to cut off certain temptations. Solomon warned that money earned through deception always returns as hidden cost, lawsuits, resentment, broken trade ties, and the slow erosion of the internal treasury. Elias recalled a past bargain that saved him briefly, but left him hated by his partners. Wisdom, Solomon said, does not only calculate profit, it preserves relationships that compound. Elias began to honor delivery promises, correct mistakes quickly, and renegotiate fairly when conditions changed, learning that lawful strength multiplies like a well-kept fire. Law 4 was the law of discipline in the flow. Solomon's court described wealth as a river that must be watched. Income requires measured retention, spending requires purpose, and saving requires intention. Elias had treated every gain as permission to breathe, then discovered his reserves were gone when hardship arrived again. The king instructed him to separate money into purposeful portions, one for replenishing inventory, one for future stability, and one for improvement, so that each trade served a plan rather than a mood. With each measured allocation, Elias felt the internal treasury swell, not as gold appeared, but as fear loosened its grip. Law 5 was the law of productive patience. Time is not the enemy, Solomon said, unless you waste it on anxious bargaining. Elias had been rushing deals to escape uncertainty, settling for terms that later cost him. Solomon taught him to wait for clarity, verify information, test reliability with small commitments, and refuse to amplify losses through impulsive rescues. Elias began to request references, compare supply consistency, and hold firm when merchants tried to bait him with hurried discounts. The shift was subtle yet profound, his decisions grew steadier, and his customers sensed it like warmth from a lamp. Law 6 was the law of wisdom-led adaptation. Markets change, and Solomon did not command rigidity, he commanded discernment. Elias learned to monitor signals without becoming trapped by them, watching demand patterns, listening for repeated complaints, and tracking which offerings brought durable repeat business. When a certain shipment proved unreliable, he did not spiral into self-accusation or panic by alternatives. He studied the cause, corrected his routes, and informed partners with honesty. The world rewards the mind that can adjust without breaking faith, Solomon said, and Elias felt his internal treasury become less fragile. That kind of strength did not shout, it simply remained. Law 7 was the law of generative use. Solomon closed with a practice that moved beyond accumulation. Wealth should be used to expand capacity, stabilize others, and refine character. Elias had hoarded coins to avoid vulnerability, yet the more he guarded, the more his life contracted. The king urged him to fund training for a young helper, support local needs that created loyal relationships, and invest in improvements that made his trade more reliable. With each generative choice, the merchant's abundance became less theoretical and more lived. His fear did not vanish in a single moment, but it began to shrink, replaced by wisdom that could hold both risk and resolve. In the palace courtyard, Elias bowed with a ledger still in hand, yet his posture had altered. He no longer treated wealth as a scarce prize guarded by fate, he treated it as a disciplined outcome of capital laws guided by wisdom. The legend did not claim that difficulties vanished, only that the mind could stop feeding scarcity into every decision. When the merchant left, the city looked the same, but his internal treasury had changed, quietly, powerfully, like dawn settling over stone. The 7 laws of the treasury, detailed. Solomon's net worth is often described in modern estimates as exceeding $2 trillion, but the enduring lesson is not the sum, it is the inner mechanism that decides whether wealth will feel like a mountain or a river. In the ancient psychology of capital, the mind becomes a treasury chamber, and the first transformation is psychological. Scarcity is treated as a rumor, while abundance is treated as a disciplined possibility. This shift does not require wishful thinking, it requires capital laws operating from within the internal treasury, guided by wisdom rather than appetite. The first law is custody of the internal treasury. Wealth begins as attention, how you guard it, where you place it, what you allow to leak away through fear, impulsive spending, or avoidance of careful plans. A steward's habit is used as an analogy. Receipts are not kept for pride but for visibility, and visibility becomes the foundation for future control. When a merchant trains himself to count honestly, inventory, debts, and timing, he stops obeying surprise and starts obeying patterns. Wisdom here is quiet and exact, turning uncertainty into measured decisions. The second law is the governance of wealth through laws, not moods. Capital that serves the person must be governed by principles that remain stable during seasons of confidence or discouragement. If you treat every week as a new beginning, you will never build compounding habits. If you treat every month as a test, you will eventually starve your own future. Consider a household that sets clear spending boundaries for housing, food, and obligations. When income rises or expenses shift, the boundaries do not vanish. They adjust by rule, not by emotion, and the internal treasury stays coherent even when the outer world becomes noisy. Third comes the law of measured earning and honest allocation. Abundance is not merely acquired, it is arranged. A farmer who plants with careful spacing understands that growth is not random, it is cultivated through method. In daily terms, measured earning means you identify what reliably produces results, work quality, market fit, dependable clients, or consistent production, then you protect that engine from distraction. Honest allocation means each dollar is assigned a purpose, including reserves for risk, and future commitments for stability, so the mind stops living as if crisis is always imminent. The fourth law is the discipline of debts and the protection of time. Some burdens do not simply cost money, they steal the ability to think. Capital psychology teaches that debt can become a psychological governor, driving decisions from panic rather than wisdom. When obligations are unmanaged, the internal treasury becomes a courtroom where every choice is judged by immediate pressure. A clearer approach is to treat repayment like a schedule with priority, separating essentials from luxuries, reducing avoidable costs, and creating a timeline to regain breathing room. Time regained is not a metaphor, it becomes the capacity to study, plan, and act with precision. Fifth is the law of strategic partnerships and trustworthy transfers. Wealth expands through channels that are reliable, ethical, and aligned with long-term interests. A treasury does not store coins alone, it also stores agreements, promises that can be measured and honored. Capital laws therefore emphasize the selection of partners, those who add value, those who respect boundaries, and those who keep commitments. When a business forms an arrangement with a dependable supplier and a predictable customer, the uncertainty of cash flow decreases, and the internal treasury becomes less anxious. Wisdom chooses relationships as carefully as it chooses assets, because credibility is a form of capital that compounds. Sixth arrives as the law of preservation and prudence. Abundance is strengthened by protection, not by denial of risk. The psychology of capital recognizes that fear is often trying to prevent harm, but panic leads to poor judgment, prudence converts fear into preparation. Establishing buffers, emergency reserves, insurance, and contingency plans means the internal treasury does not collapse when a difficult month arrives. A family that keeps a reserve for repairs can avoid expensive, desperate borrowing when a roof needs attention. That preservation is an act of wisdom. It keeps the mind from being ruled by catastrophe narratives. Seventh is the law of wise expansion and purposeful use. Wealth without purpose turns into restless motion, while wealth with purpose becomes direction. Capital laws insist that growth should be proportional to learning, and purpose should be measured by outcomes rather than appearances. An investor who expands only after building competence, understanding risks, diversifying responsibly, and reviewing performance, does not treat profit as a lottery. Likewise, a professional who reinvests in skills, processes, or assets that increase future earning potential treats abundance as a stewardship. In this final law, the internal treasury aligns with wisdom so that even when circumstances change, the person remains guided, not driven, by the flow of wealth. How to apply ancient laws today? Solomon is remembered as a king whose wealth was so vast that later traditions placed it beyond ordinary reach. Yet the truer legacy lies in the psychological architecture behind it, the deliberate shift from scarcity to abundance. Scarcity tightens the breath, narrows perception, and turns every decision into a defense. Abundance expands attention, invites better questions, and treats opportunity as something that can be cultivated rather than merely chased. Within the mind, this change is housed in the internal treasury, an inner ledger of discipline, gratitude, and clear intention. The capital laws begin with a core practice: preserve wisdom before seeking gain. When you lead with wisdom, you reduce impulsive risk and you choose actions that can endure downturns. A modern application is to review your finances and commitments with calm precision rather than anxiety-driven urgency, then decide on one sustainable move you can repeat monthly. If you must invest, do it in a way you can understand deeply, and if you must spend, do it with a reason that aligns with your future. This is not restraint for its own sake, it is the confidence that comes from seeing the path clearly. First law: build an internal treasury through ordered habits. Treat your inner world like a reservoir, budgeting rituals, automatic saving, and consistent learning feed it day by day. If you routinely pay yourself before you pay others, your mind learns that safety is not a lottery ticket but a process. When an unexpected expense arrives, you respond with steadiness because the treasury is already stocked. Abundance here is practical, it is the emotional permission to act without panic. Second law, honor agreements and boundaries with clarity. In wealth, silence often becomes leakage, and uncertainty becomes an invitation for loss. Use written terms for work, contracts, and lending, and set time limits for decisions so you do not drift into obligations you cannot sustain. If a business relationship becomes vague, reframe it immediately with measurable expectations. This law trains the mind to value dependable structures over flattering promises. Third law, turn every lesson into capital. Capital laws do not speak only of money, they speak of experience converted into better decisions. After a mistake, catalog what happened, why it happened, and what you will change in your process. Then apply the new standard to your next action, whether that action is hiring, pricing, or managing debt. Over time, your failures become teacher guides, and your internal treasury becomes richer because you metabolize reality instead of rehearsing fear. Fourth law, cultivate trustworthy networks through service and competence. Abundance often moves through relationships, but it moves with reciprocity and reliability, not with manipulation. Offer real value first, clear work, honest feedback, or dependable follow-through, then allow opportunity to find you naturally. When a trusted connection shares insight, you test it and incorporate what proves useful, rather than treating every suggestion as a command. Wisdom converts relationships into durable pathways instead of temporary windfalls. Fifth law, practice measured risk instead of emotional gambling. Scarcity psychology seeks quick relief, and it often disguises fear as courage. Abundance psychology chooses risks sized to your ability to recover and learn. Use scenario planning for major decisions, keep reserves for volatility, and avoid concentration where one event could break your plans. In daily life, this means investing in tools, education, or business experiments with limits you can honor. Sixth law, protect the mind from financial noise. The internal treasury weakens when attention is constantly hijacked by comparison, outrage, or relentless speculation. Choose a small number of metrics that reflect your real situation, such as cash flow consistency, savings rate, and debt reduction progress. Reduce exposure to channels that inflame anxiety, and replace them with content that strengthens wisdom. Calm attention turns uncertainty into usable information rather than a storm that demands immediate action. Seventh law, express gratitude and stewardship to stabilize abundance. Wealth is not merely accumulated, it is directed, shared, and kept in balance with responsibility. In modern form, this can mean charitable giving that is planned, volunteering that reflects your strengths, or mentorship that costs time yet multiplies outcomes for others. When you treat resources as a trust, your decisions become steadier, and your confidence stops depending on constant growth. Wisdom then becomes a compass, even if results fluctuate, your direction holds. Wealth is a choice. Solomon's net worth is often discussed in the realm of legend and modern estimates, yet the deeper lesson is not the figure, it is the inward governance that decided what he pursued. Wealth, in this ancient psychology, is not a reward granted to the lucky hand, it is a choice made by the mind that governs attention, intention, and action. When the world feels tight, the psyche bargains for survival, and every decision is filtered through fear. When the inner treasury is awakened, perception shifts, and the mind begins to treat opportunity as present rather than rare. The first capital law is recognition. Scarcity is a story the mind repeats until it becomes a cage. A person practicing this law stops treating limited resources as a permanent verdict and starts treating them as a temporary condition, manageable, negotiable, and improvable. A merchant who once refused risk because there will not be enough begins to count concrete assets instead, skills, relationships, time, and reliable income streams. In cinematic clarity, the scene changes from hiding to building, from reacting to shaping. Next comes the second capital law, alignment with wisdom. Wisdom is not mere knowledge, it is the ability to choose wisely when consequences are uncertain. The wealth seeker watches habits, language, and daily decisions as though they were omens, because they are. If the mind continually chooses delay, spending for comfort, and avoidance of uncomfortable learning, then abundance is not rejected by fate, it is rejected by behavior. But when wisdom becomes the director, even small commitments, saving consistently, tracking obligations, improving a craft, turn into quiet momentum. The third capital law is internal budgeting for the external world, where the internal treasury is treated as sacred. The internal treasury is the mental reserve of principles, honesty, patience, disciplined desire, and the courage to postpone gratification. In practical terms, this means a person refuses to fund lifestyle by panic, and refuses to purchase status with unstable income. When an unexpected cost arrives, the internal treasury responds with calm plans rather than desperate reactions. The choice is immediate: surrender to scarcity thinking, or uphold the standards that keep the foundation intact. Fourth is the capital law of measurement: wealth grows through accurate accounting of time, debt, and return. Many who feel unlucky are merely living without clear observation. Their finances are ruled by emotions, not by facts. A household that reviews spending, examines recurring obligations, and sets attainable goals transforms confusion into direction. Even a single worksheet, tracking inflows and outflows with discipline, can loosen the grip of scarcity. Clarity is a form of courage, and courage is the first step toward consistent results. Fifth arrives as the capital law of stewardship: wealth must be used with intention, or it turns into distraction. Solomon's psychological emphasis does not celebrate accumulation without purpose. Instead, it teaches that every gain should have a role, safety, growth, or service, because purpose steadies the mind. A person who saves with a declared intention for stability and future opportunity does not squander as easily, since the internal treasury is already committed. Abundance becomes sustainable when it is attached to wisdom rather than to impulse. Sixth is the capital law of strategic diversification of effort. Scarcity thinking narrows the mind, concentrating energy in one anxious channel until it fails. Abundance thinking spreads attention across skills, income sources, and relationships that can strengthen each other. This does not require gambling, it requires patience and deliberate expansion. A professional who cultivates a primary skill while developing complementary abilities, teaching, consulting, writing, partnerships, creates resilience when one path slows. The choice is again inward: fear shrinks the horizon, wisdom widens it. Seventh is the capital law of continued renewal: wealth is maintained through repeated alignment, not occasional breakthroughs. Wealth is a practice, and practices require reflection, correction, and renewed commitments. When performance dips, the scarcity mind blames external forces and seeks quick relief. The abundance mind studies the system and adjusts with discipline. The internal treasury is strengthened by honest review, respectful learning, and the willingness to change without humiliation. In that renewed rhythm, the promise becomes real: wealth is not merely obtained, it is chosen, day after day, through wisdom guided by the decisions that rule the inner world. Solomon's net worth was over $2 trillion. Yet the true wealth in his reign was not measured by gold, but by mind and motive: how he turned human fear into governance, and longing into deliberate provision. The ancient psychology of capital begins the moment you choose to stop seeing life as a constant shortage. Here are the 7 capital laws that reshaped his thinking, and can reshape yours. First, guard your inner treasury. Do not let worry, envy, or impulsive desire write the rules of your life. Treat your inner treasury as sacred account: clean intentions, clear standards, steady focus. Second, anchor your actions in wisdom. Wealth grows where discernment guides decisions: what to pursue, what to delay, and what to refuse. When wisdom leads, capital follows. Third, measure your means before you chase your wants. Scarcity thinking spends tomorrow to soothe today. Abundance thinking studies the path forward, budgets the risk, and builds with patience. Fourth, practice faithful stewardship. Give order to resources, time, attention, labor, and money. Stewardship transforms what you have into momentum, and momentum becomes capital. Fifth, cultivate beneficial alliances. No fortune is earned in isolation, it is refined through relationships. Choose companions whose character strengthens your own, and whose counsel sharpens your judgment. Sixth, endure through disciplined labor. Abundance is not an accident, it is sustained effort. When you work with purpose, setbacks become training rather than proof of failure. 7th, align your ambitions with purpose. Wealth without meaning is a restless hall of mirrors. Purpose provides direction, and direction builds lasting value. As you absorb these laws, notice the quiet shift. Scarcity no longer drives your choices. Abundance becomes a way of seeing, an inner treasury you manage, a set of capital laws you practice, and wisdom that keeps you steady when desire grows loud. You begin to ask better questions. What is truly enough? What is truly wise? What creates value that outlives the moment? If this message moved you, take one step today, choose one law to apply for the next 7 days, and decide what you will protect inside your inner treasury. Then return tomorrow, because the next video will reveal how Solomon's principles translate into practical wealth thinking you can carry into every decision, from the smallest commitment to the largest investment.
Thank you for watching. Goodbye.